this does bring up a debate about, well, why do we need to worry about all this if the end game is autonomy? And my point is because we're on the journey. And while we're sitting in the driver's seat, we can't pretend like the system is being designed for something that hasn't come yet.
Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am super happy to be with Chuck Cook, who I just realized, unless I'm mistaken, I have been with you doing your left-hand turn down in Florida, but have not actually had you on my channel, which is just stupid. So we are correcting that problem. You posted on X this morning, I believe, or maybe it was last night, about actively monitoring full self-driving. And of course, you've had a chance to drive FSD 12.5.1, and I have as well. So let's just talk about all that stuff. First of all, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, well, thanks, John. First of all, yeah, we spent a lot of time together, so that's probably why it seems so odd that we haven't maybe done this a little bit more than we have. A lot of that time has been in Austin or at other events here in Florida, or even when you drove down to Jacksonville to do the unprotected left turn with me, which was a great time. And I think that's the video footage you were just talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion on the back channels with me to exert more of my perhaps professional aviator experience, background, and training, and discuss how the crossover of where it integrates with what we're doing with FSD. And believe me, there are a lot of crossovers. And as I talk about them, sometimes it is good to make parallels. It's also good to make sure we understand the differences, right?
Yes.
You know, airplanes flying in the sky don't have traffic and stoplights and intersections and things like that. You know, we call it the big sky, little plane theory. Like, you're probably not going to hit anything. I'm joking, but there is a lot of sky up there that we're flying in, and we're not dodging, you know, pedestrians and VRUs and things like that, which is what FSD is trying to do. But some of the similarities kind of go back into my background. And let me just start that a little bit. For those that don't know me or haven't read my LinkedIn profile or my bio on X or on YouTube, anywhere else, you know, I'm a military trained pilot. You know, I graduated from the Naval Academy, you know, 3 decades ago, and went straight into aviation, flew carrier-based aviation for about 25 years, some reserve duty in there. And then I joined the airlines and flew in the reserves at the same time, flying the 737 and the Airbus A320 and the 321 kind of at the same time together. And I've been doing that, you know, still am. So I'm a commercial pilot today on the Airbus fleet of aircraft. And the crossovers there, what's amazing is what we call and we train to this, called the levels of automation. You know, and the parallels and the logic of the levels of automation definitely apply to FSD. You know, you got level 0, which is basically you're flying the plane. Think of a, you know, stick and rudder, or you're at the controls of the yoke. You're controlling the throttle, which is the speed. You're controlling the yoke or the stick, which is the lateral and the vertical navigation. You take that over to the car, you have control of the accelerator, you have control of the brake, and you have control of the steering wheel or yoke. If you have one of those, you're a control at automation level 0.
And of course, people are very familiar with that, of course, driving, because that's the way we normally drive.
Right. And that's what you've been doing since you were 14, 15, or 16 years old, is automation level 0. And then in the 70s and 80s, they introduced cruise control, right? You know, and hey, wait a minute, look, I can hit this little button and it kind of maintains the speed plus or minus a few. Well, Tesla gave us that equivalent. It's called traffic aware cruise control, TAC. Well, that is actually level 1 of automation, where you give away one of the axes of motion in an airplane. That would be the auto throttle. So you're sort of saying, hey, maintain a speed for me, and I don't have to, you know, push the throttles back and forth. Same thing with traffic aware cruise control. We set a speed with our scroll wheel, or the autopilot sets it for us, and it basically is managing the accelerator for you. You've given away one level of automation. And then you go up to the next level of automation in an airplane, and now you're giving away lateral control. So perhaps you're telling the plane it can do left and right turns, can't go up and down. That's a different level of automation. You know, and now you could say to the Tesla, that's sort of where we are today with navigation, right? It can take turns, it can change lanes and things like that. It's another level of automation. In an airplane, you have another dimension, so it's vertical. So you know, until we get the Roadster, we don't quite have that level of automation yet. We'll get there. We'll get there. But you know, so the airplane, you give a vertical navigation, so you can say you can climb or descend on a level of automation. But the important thing that we train with all these levels of automation is anything goes wrong, anytime anything goes wrong, or you're not sure what the vehicle, aircraft, or car is doing, lower the level of automation. So you can start to close it back in. Your brain can catch up with what the instructions the vehicle is doing. And that's what we do when we perhaps use the accelerator to override or intervene, perhaps tap the brake to disengage, or use the stalk, if you have one of those, to disengage to lower the level of automation. So you take back control, you can reassess the situation, and then re-engage the levels of automation as your situation awareness comes up, and then you turn it back on. It's just a standard safety, kind of a feature. Now, that's just the levels of automation. That was a whole lot of talking. It may have spurred some questions for you there, John.
So I just wanted to let me go back to this quickly, but I wanted to show this because this was the post that got me thinking I needed to talk to you. But yeah, this is and so I'll link this, of course, so people can go and check it out. But you've gotten pretty good engagement, 104,000 views, so that's really cool. But basically, yeah, it's the so all of the things that you bring up are really, really good to talk about. But I think that the sort of primary question is, or the question that you brought up was the attention sort of getting, I don't know what you want to call it. The thing that not just that you have to escalate it or de-escalate it or de-automate it, right? So if I think to myself, the car's not driving fast enough, or it's going to make a bad decision about which lane to get in or something like that, I just take over. That's me taking over. What yours was flipping that a little bit and saying that there's also some, in an airplane or something, there's a good chance that what happens is the automation can also go like, hey, I'm having a little bit of trouble right now. Maybe you should take over, and this would be a good thing. So that's the sort of thing. It's like, it needs to alert you. It needs to tell you what's going on. Now, we're not saying that the car is responsible for that, of course, just to be clear, because you are responsible for the vehicle, because, of course, this is L2 driving. This is not anything beyond that. When you click the box to sign up for the FSD beta or supervised, it says you are in control of the car. You have to, pay attention at all times. But it is interesting. What you were saying was, it's so smooth. You even said something, I could drive you off a cliff, it'll be smooth. So, it's that kind of a thing. It's like what would happen, for example, in either a military or civilian aircraft, if the system started to get confused, for whatever reason, what would happen? Like, what would you as a pilot see?
Yeah, and confusion might not be the wrong word, because computers typically don't get confused. Something happens, an engine failure. Well, I didn't expect to lose an engine, but now that I lost an engine, I've got to deal with the problem. Well, one of the first things that would happen is some of the systems would start turning themselves off because of the malfunction in the aircraft. The same thing could happen in the car. When sometimes the cameras are obscured or something like that, you're driving in the heavy rain, or that say you got some snow, or Chris Dirty Tesla's road, if the camera's too covered up, the Tesla will ultimately say, I can't see, and it will not allow you to engage FSD. In the old days, we're still there a little bit. In a heavy downpour, you wouldn't get the little gray steering wheel to engage it, because it didn't quite have the situational awareness it needed in order to allow you to engage. You could call that another kind of indicator. I do want to say, to your point, that this does bring up a debate about, well, why do we need to worry about all this if the end game is autonomy? And my point is because we're on the journey. And while we're sitting in the driver's seat, we can't pretend like the system is being designed for something that hasn't come yet, because my life and our vehicle safety and the people around us safety is still required. Now, that doesn't mean that Tesla is obligated to spend a lot of money in what some companies would call human machine interface design, because the end game isn't to have the perfect knob or the perfect switch or the perfect audible tone or the perfect human voice talking to you, if the intent long game is to not have that. And I would argue that the beta tester or the supervising tester feedback that we've provided over the years has given some human machine interface hints, because we got a creep network that they put in there to let us see that little wall. The machine doesn't need to show us that. They gave us the little blue median strip, which I think has disappeared on this latest version, where it sees it can drive into the median. The machine doesn't need to show us that, but they've given it.
Just take the visualization as a period. Ultimately, when you're a passenger, you don't need to have all that pretty visualization, so the goal, of course, and again, the analogy with an airplane is to go from being the pilot of the airplane to the guy sitting in coach. You're row 31B, and you're just sitting there. So you have nothing to do with the flying of the airplane or the driving of the car. and at that point, it doesn't matter if it has any screen at all. I mean, I guess I'd want to watch Netflix or something, but you don't have to see a visualization of what's going on. So all of that is sort of an HCI as well. And of course, that's gotten much better. You remember way back in the early days when it was little bounding boxes, and
oh yeah,
it was very.
You can see them on our channels if you want to go back and look.
Yeah,
they're there.
So,
yeah. But let me argue with you there just a little bit, because have you driven in a Waymo yet yourself?
I have not had a chance to.
Okay, so if anyone that has, there's a certain amount of human pacification that is required for the brand or the product to take off, to where people feel comfortable that they're not jumping into a black box to play Schrodinger and to see what happens. So my point is that the screens kind of play nice little flight attendant. Hey, guess what? We're going from here to here. We have this much time to go, just like I come on the radio and tell you how the rides are going to be, and the flight attendants' names, and what you can expect on the flight, and when we're going to land, and what the weather is when we're going to land. That's a little bit of human pacification in order to make us feel cozy, warm, and safe. That is human machine interface. It's just not control. So if there was a traffic jam, I think as a passenger, I'd like to see it on the screen and maybe visualize it. Yeah. I'd love for me, like a New Yorker, I'm not a New Yorker per se, but I've worked there a long time, to tell the cab which way to go instead of going the way it's going, because I think I know better, which is what New Yorkers do to their cabbies all the time.
It's like, take 35th Street. What are you doing?
That's right. Yeah. But this is a great debate. And we can talk about this till we're blue in the face, because I bet if we were here with the Tesla engineers and Ashok and the AI team, I bet this is a controversy that they talk about all the time, about how much money to spend on human machine interface if the end game is this. Arguably, I think Elon has interjected his leadership and decision-making on some of these over the years about don't do that, go there. And fine, make a decision and march towards it. That's how you execute and get things done. I don't disagree with all of those decisions. Some of them I'm still kind of wishing ultrasonic sensors were still around just a little bit longer, maybe things like that. You kind of, I don't debate the radar issue, because I do think vision can solve it, but camera locations, we don't need to get into that on this. But there's a lot of things I'm kind of scratching my head going, were we ready for that decision, or were we just using Elon's rules of eliminate? I just want to see the add 10% back part sometimes too, if we're going to do that. Anyway, that went down that little rabbit hole.
So we can talk about camera position. I think you're specifically B pillar is the one that you're really that's the one that you, and I noticed with the Cybertruck they did not fix that problem. If
we have a bumper camera that we don't know its complete usefulness in FSD, and my guess is none. I think it's more of a parking camera to take away the blind spot. It exists on all current Teslas, especially when you're parked and you don't have recall from where you were when you parked before.
And if you have experienced Teslas, you know that the parking now is annoying because it always backs in, and it's because it's got a camera in the back, and hopefully the Cybertruck will allow you to park forward. But it's like a lot of times I'm facing right at a parking spot and I hit it and the thing like spins around. It's like, come on, man, just go straight in. So anyway, that's one of those situations that because it doesn't have a front bumper camera, it feels uncomfortable doing that. I think that again, looking at this as a sort of progression, we are owed some sort of I mean, I feel like we're super lucky to be able to do this at all. It's incredible. Like you don't usually get to test out disruptive technology as just a normal human being, right? As opposed to somebody who's hired by a company and an engineer. And I think that's really quite the privilege, but I guess in the sense of owed, like if we are going to be behind the driver's seat, in the driver's seat, behind the wheel, all that kind of stuff, there are things that we expect to have to make us comfortable. I think it's Farzad who said right now is the hardest, the highest bar that they're ever going to have. Because if you're in the back of a Waymo or the back of an Uber or a taxi, you might argue with the cabbie that it's like, oh, you should take this road instead. But for the most part, you're just like, whatever, just get me there. And it's fine. But right now you feel like a driver because you're in the driver's seat. So you're giving up a level of autonomy, and that's a sacrifice on a person's part to do that.
Yeah. It really is. And you can see some of the functionality. And oh, by the way, we can the hardware 3, hardware 4, hardware 2, 2.5, AI 4 and AI 5, equipment going forward. they are going to be forking the software at different levels of capability. Just the amount of discussion we've had on X in the last 2 weeks about needing to optimize hardware 3. Elon even said there's a lot of software work to be done to optimize. Those are strong words, just kind of saying how long this runway is. Very clearly, hardware 3 will get FSD 2.5. Please don't think I'm not saying that. But FSD 2.5 is not a robotaxi. So how far is it? 2.8? Is it 2.9? Is it 12? I'm using 2. I meant to say 12s. But the point is we got a lot further to go. And is hardware 3 going to be able to keep up? Today, it used to, they're still there, even though it can do it, unlike U-turns, unable to complete maneuver. All right. That's right in the SAE level 3 notification. Got to be in the seat. You don't need to do anything or pay attention unless I tell you, hey, I need help. That's exactly SAE level 3, that little unable to complete maneuver warning. So if they're going to go down that angle, or at least open that door to say, hey, if we got a driver in the seat, we could probably tell him he doesn't need to pay attention unless we alert him. And then we're going to start using these alerts that we were talking about just before we went down the last little rabbit hole. How do they get the attention of the driver? Today they got red flashing hands, they got flashing blue, they got little banners on the screen, and even some audible notifications for, attention monitoring and things like that, that they can extend that human machine interface to whatever extent they want. For level 4, and I know Tesla stopped using these levels for description of where they're going. They're trying to say safer than a human, but I'm just trying to give some delineation of functionality differences. Meaning like you could be in the back seat, probably maybe a constrained area. We're going to tell you, where we can go. But there's also something that we don't know. Is Tesla's network, Elon has referred to this, going to have a dispatch center for the, oh my gosh, we're all going down at the end of a cul-de-sac, kind of how do we back them up? How do we get Teslas out of a jam? How do we communicate with a customer that feels like they're going the wrong direction? There needs to be something in there, probably just as a fail-safe. And hopefully those jobs are few and far between, and you don't need, one dispatcher per car. And we're starting to talk to one dispatcher per 1,000 cars, or 10,000 cars or something, so you could just manage the one-offs. But there does need to be some sort of remote kind of interfacing, things like that.
I've started to, in my last 2 drives, I got 12.5 and then 12.5.1 within 24 hours, and in the 2 videos that I did, I'm very explicit that I'm starting to think about cybercab, about robotaxi, rather than me as a driver anymore. It's like, where would this fail if I couldn't take over? Because right now, for the most part, it drives the streets great, it does all this stuff, but sometimes it doesn't pull over at the end of the drive. Sometimes it can't get out of a parking lot. If there's failovers where it doesn't matter, because I can easily take over and drive the 5 feet to adjust that problem. But when you don't have anybody, when there's no steering wheel, you're like, well, this is a problem now, because we can't get out of this.
I've described that as a bell curve. I feel like if every drive was a bell curve, it's the beginning and the ends that it kind of needed more work, but the center of every drive is just awesome. If we're saying we're on an exponential curve of improvement, I agree that middle of the curve is getting really, really, really good, but the tail ends, the beginning end, haven't changed in 4 years really. We still don't have parking lots have gotten better. It'll find its way out of a parking lot, but it's not going to a parking space. The location POI pins are very rough and generic, and if you're going to Target or going to Costco or something like that, the pin can't be the location that every single dispatch car goes to. You got to have, okay, the front door is here, or something a little bit better. Otherwise, but now make no mistake, we can do like we do on the Uber and Lyft app, to where we say where we want to go, but then we get the pin modify exactly where I want to be dropped off. And that could be how Tesla does this in a robotaxi world. You say you want to go to Costco, but then you move the pin to the front door rather than perhaps where the flagpole is.
I mean, or the other option, of course, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but with an Uber driver, you would say, just drop me off at the front door. And so you would speak to them, and almost surely we're going to have some sort of natural language interface. So right now you can go navigate to Costco, but you can't say navigate to the front door of Costco. It's just going to drop you where the little geolocation pin is. So it's going to need something like that. Again, this is what I would call this the human machine interface. And it's quite possible, from what Elon's been talking about, they might spend $5 billion on that. So they might spend a lot of money on it, purchasing, access to Grok. And I think that's the natural evolution. It also allows the computer to communicate with us. that same, the Chuck Cook as pilot, coming on the thing, and it can be like, oh, I see a traffic jam ahead, so I'm changing our route, so I'm going this way instead. Now I know it shows that on the screen right now if it does that, but I'm just saying there's more. If I'm not really paying attention, because we're now talking about a full level 3 version of the software where I'm not really having to pay attention, having a voice come in and over the radio telling me what it's going to do, or saying like, hey, I'm about to get into a bad pickle right now, can you please help me, anything like that. Natural language is a good way of doing it, because that way I'm like, oh, I understand what you're asking for now. So
yeah, and they're vertically integrated, and you could argue that the work they're doing on Optimus is in this lane perfectly right now too. If they're going to be talking to Optimus about go do this, go do that, that human machine interface is already being done under the same roof. They don't need to go pay XAI to do it yet, even though that LLM may be part of it if we end up becoming partners at some point between those two companies. It feels like Elon has made very strategic, vertically integrated decision making on so many of his businesses. Boring being part of the Mars vision, and XAI just being part of the AI fight, even though we already had a huge AI division needing a large language model experience because of where we are today. Not sure if we're going to be there in 5 or 10 years or not. I think those were great decisions, even though expensive. In this data center inside of Giga Austin, oh my God, talking about going all in. That cooling system is amazing to watch. And on Joe Techmeyer's videos, and it's like, oh, wow. You could probably cool a lot with that thing.
The thing that just blows my mind with that data center is the amount. It's on the south side of the building, so all the sun, and it's all windows. I'm like, oh my goodness. that seems like that might not be the wisest decision, but clearly the engineers know what they're doing better than I do. But I'm just thinking for cooling and heating, I'm like, that is a lot of energy from the sun coming in there at all hours of the day. So
it really is. That's for sure.
Yeah. So,
well, you want to keep going down this avenue? There's a lot we could talk about.
I mean, I actually want to go back to your pilot sort of days and things. And one of the things that you talked about, which of course I don't know because I don't sit in the cockpit. And by the way, one of my bucket list items, I'm waiting until I'm too old to do a lot of the more physical stuff, but is to get my pilot's license. And that's not because I don't want it now. It's because I got a kid in high school and stuff still, and I'm broke. So So anyway, but a lot of the things you were saying with you and the co-pilot, you would say we're going to 12,000 feet, and you point at the at the 12,000 foot marker. The co-pilot points at the 12,000 foot marker. We're going to 12,000 feet, whatever. So that there's this sort of confirmation levels of making sure that everything is going according to plan.
This is what we call the threat and error management model. So in order to manage risk, you have to mitigate risk. In order to fly, you didn't do anything dangerous, you have to mitigate risk. Arguably the safest thing to do would be to never fly the airplane and never take off. That's the safest thing to do.
Stay in your house. Don't go anywhere.
That's not the radio. Don't wake up in the morning. You might slip getting coffee. So if you're going to live, you need to manage risk. And we all do this in our daily lives without even thinking about it as we grow up, and we learn not to touch hot burners when we're kids. And then we grow up and learn what our bodies are capable of doing and might not be capable of doing. And then as we age, we start to forget what we used to be able to do and what we actually can do. And we have to relearn and manage that risk differently, right? But in the flight deck, through decades and decades of aviation history, many of these procedures have been what we call written in blood, meaning like something bad happened, so we had to change the way we did business, and therefore we came up with a new procedure. And believe me, many industries emulate what we do in aviation, specifically medical surgery. They come at us all the time to ask us nitty gritty about how we standardize procedure, how we find ways of mitigating risk and eliminating things. That's why the doctor's right on your arm these days when they're operating on your right arm instead of your left. That's why they do things with you to verbalize. You could argue the doctor signing your arm for a right arm surgery and you verifying, yes, that's my right arm, is the exact same thing as me and my co-pilot going 12,000. You agree 12,000? Right? Okay, let's go do it. We're doing 12,000. It's the same sort of mitigation.
Right.
I now listen, I'm not saying we need to talk to our cars or we need a co-pilot to drive these things safely. You could argue that in higher levels of automation, the computer is doing that for you. And that's why you have redundancy. That's why you have 2 FSD chips. Arguably, those 2 FSD chips are having that argument for us. Hey, I want to go this way. Hey, you want to go that way? Well, we can't decide. We got to decide. Usually have to have a tiebreaker. When they introduced the Cybertruck, they actually talked for the first time about having triple redundancy on the drive-by-wire system in this decision 1, decision 2 overriding decision 3 type
Right.
of, what do you want to do with drive-by-wire control? We don't have triple redundancy on any systems in hardware 3 and AI4 right now. Don't
Right.
know if that would be a regulatory requirement. Probably wouldn't. But my
Right.
point is most safety level equipment used in automation does have 3. On our
Right.
aircraft, we have 3 GPS systems. Well, we have more than 3, but we typically have 3 reference positions. We have inertial reference, we have GPS reference, we have altitude measured by GPS and by pneumatics, and all of these systems get to argue with each other. And when they disagree is when I hear these bells and whistles we talked about at the beginning of this video. Something's not right. I get a notification that, wait a minute, the speed on the left doesn't match the speed on the right. Hey, you, Mr. Pilot, you need to decide which one you want to trust. Arguably, the Air France accident was a prime use case of that going very, very bad, where the pilots and the instruments were confused as to what their airspeed was because of pitot tubes being iced over. And the situation was confusing to the air crew and to the aircraft, and ultimately they tragically ended.
Right.
But in this, I just think about these things as I'm driving this car, going, it all is the same. It's like, I can't tell you the number of times, if you're just letting your attention go a little bit and you're perhaps looking at your phone down there because FSD is driving, and all of a sudden you feel the steering wheel jerk. You're like, oh, wait a minute, what did it see? What did it see? Because I wasn't looking at the moment. Those were the cues I was trying to refer to in that video, going, this FSD version is getting so smooth. I feel like I'm losing all of those cues. And it's just letting me let my hair down, my guard down just a little bit more, which could be a good thing. But I'm also recognizing that as a trained, I guess I could say pilot.
Yeah.
Absent those cues, I start to kind of go, am I uncomfortable now? Am I not sure what's going on? In my very first unprotected left turn this week in 12.51, I had a perfect scenario and there was a lot of traffic going, and I let my mind go at ease. And I started playing with the screen, and because I was like, oh, there's no way we're going for the next 2 or 3, iterations here. And then all of a sudden the car started going, and I kind of freaked out, go, whoa, and disengaged. Even though the car might have made it, I had let my awareness down to the point that once it started rolling, I was now confused and didn't want to make a late decision. So I just disengaged right then. Anyway, that all ties together into what we were talking about, but it is driving so smooth. And like I said in that video, even the F-ups are smooth.
Right. And I think that's like, I was really intrigued by that moment in your drive. And it was right at the beginning of the video too. So by the way, I'll leave links to all this stuff in the description so people can go check this out. And of course, subscribe to Chuck if you haven't, but it's that kind of a thing where it can be very easy for your attention as a supervisor to wander over time. And of course, when I'm doing these test drives and doing my like sort of unprotected unprotected left turn that's similar to yours, but I'm very, very alert at those points, because I'm like, oh, but then I get on the road and I'm driving to work and I'm just I'm paying attention, but not as much as maybe I should be. And it's one of those things where your mind, because it's so good, and it doesn't do those things where it's like, all of a sudden it stops in the middle of the road, and you're like, what the hell is that all about? So because of that, it is very easy to just drift a little bit, and maybe it's not. Maybe the question is not Tesla, but maybe is, what do we do? Like, so we are suddenly like test pilots in a sense, right? I mean, that's kind of cool.
Well, I don't want to go too far down the road of Tesla's abusing us as test pilot training, because we all discussed what we're doing. This isn't, they're not throwing software.
I'm not saying that in a bad way at all. I'm saying that in a good way. It's cool.
It is getting so good. It's easy to visualize that we don't need to be there. It is in some situations, and in others it's not. But it is, the human brain is good at nullifying itself and starting to go, think about the easy scenarios. And you have to be woken back up, which is what adrenaline sort of does for us sometimes in order to wake you back up. I think that we're in a transition point. Farzad's comment is valid. This could be the hardest part we're going through right now until we can actually say you're not required in the driver's seat.
Right.
But And I've just kind of wanted to keep being the safety guy. I mean, just don't forget, pay attention, because I'm just imagining my son or my daughter or some young kids that are getting FSD in a brand new car and going out and rimming their tires and they're going, what happened? I'm like, I wish I'd have been able to talk to you sooner and just say, it's great, but just don't trust it all the way to hurting your car, right? Like, a curb, it could be very precise and then it's not, right? I mean, and we could be very proud of a car that missed a curb by an inch going, it knew exactly where it was. Right. I'm like, I don't think we have that kind of resolution yet. I think that might be luck sometimes. I don't know. I'm just saying it only has one camera to see it, and it's calculating trajectories in real time, and it's doing a whole lot. And we really don't have any idea of where we are with latency or reaction time or anything like that. We just get to empirically perceive its reaction time by how it feels.
I think, with humans, we this is one of those things where we learn, like, you curb your tire a couple of times as a person, like driving, you're like, okay, I'm going to give this more room than I think I need, because you're just like, oh, my car. So there's that sense of like the vehicle, it just, perhaps it needs that, like, oh, that was me, ouch. It's like the same thing as burning your hand on a stove when you're a kid. It's kind of like an experience that every child has. You pick up some hot object or put your hand on a stove. There's no other real way to learn that, unfortunately. It's a couple of blisters and you don't feel so good for a couple of days, but you learn.
Unfortunately, we learn in real time,
yes.
And an AI model learns through retraining through better data. So no one should think that, oh, it won't curb it on that curb again because I just hit it today. It's going to hit it tomorrow possibly too, if the conditions are similar, until they retrain a model on a different data set that says, let's give it more room, or they use training clips that allow more room or something like that. We have some weird local layer that I think is more of a heat map of where we go and what we do. I think Green the Only has talked a little bit about that. So there is some local data about you, but I don't think it's about that curb and this curb. It might be like, oh, he always goes right, or she always goes left, or this seems to be where they go the most often. And sometimes that's how it decides which way to go when you put on autopilot without a destination. I think it's supposed to be following that most likely trajectory.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to try that then. So I actually want to do a test drive where I don't give it a destination and just fire it up and see what happens. It seems to prefer right-hand turns to left-hand turns, which is a good idea. And I haven't really tried it too much, but I will tell you that it is the most frustrating thing about full self-driving right now for me. Number one, the speed limit's too slow. For whatever reason, everyone else complains it's too fast, and mine are always like not fast enough. So maybe that's just being in Georgia, and you're in Florida, so it's like if you're not doing 10 over, you're not even like going the speed limit, at that point.
Well, and especially if you're in the passing lane. So if you're gonna play grandma, get in the grandma lane. You can't have it both ways.
Right. Well, I even mean like on the surface streets, like it'll. I've got a 50-mile-an-hour zone right outside my neighborhood, and it goes 38, and it's like, it says 50. You can see the sign, and it even registers 50, and it goes, so it's like, why? But then Chris Dirty Tesla says, like, man, it goes so fast for me, and he's saying 33 and a 25, and I'm like, well, that's actually the speed I like to drive in a neighborhood. So hypothetically, but so it's very what all that is to say that there cannot be one version of autopilot that will rule everyone. There's got to be a localization or personalization layer on top of it. And while I do believe that they have something like that, it's not very good yet, or at least not individualized. It may be a heat map that's kind of a general, like, everyone who drives in this area down this road tends to do this, but it's not John does this, and John has very specific like things that John wants to do. So
we got the small, little, chill, average, aggressive settings, which are mostly around lane change aggressiveness and following distance and things like that to help you navigate like LA traffic versus rural traffic and things like that. But I honestly, every build comes so fast, and we haven't been given clear guidance other than what the screen says those functions do about how they're using those levers to modify the behavior inside of the model. So we are kind of fishing in the dark a little bit there. Like for the first time, I think recently, this is not necessarily about driving, but Elon referred to, if you have the advanced setting turned on, we're pushing this to you, and everybody's like, you're actually using that button on the the earlier, the advanced the software updates.
Exactly.
It's kind of like, I hadn't seen anybody get any real feedback on that forever. Sometimes I feel the same way when I try to email early access or talk to them, and I'm like, just give me a sign, a smoke signal that this is
throw up something to see. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, it's the same kind of thing with the feedback, right? Like I often, like now, what I'm actually starting to do, I think this is also from you, is disengage not when it does something safety critical, but when it's like, no, it could drive better. And if I'm like, I will disengage and say it could have done a better job by doing this. And I feel like hopefully they're collecting that information.
Yeah. And I think the better you can talk in very clear, concise words and don't babble on that little voice clip, it's probably going to make their curating of that data much, much easier. You know, just be very clear and concise, you know, disengage because blah, 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 you know. Don't use, you know, a lot of people joke about how funny it would be to see how many swear words were coming across those video clips and things like that. It'd be a great blooper reel, I'm sure.
Exactly.
And I'm sure they get a kick out of what we said on that reel too.
It's like that freaking car, just like, you know, wow. So yeah, I try to do that myself. I had a test driving yesterday when I was doing this. I went to the car wash as part of the test drive, and I went through the car wash, went and vacuumed and stuff like that. And then the car wash is like one of those frame things, but you could drive through it because there's parking on the other side, but nobody was there. So I engaged the autopilot or the FSD then, because I was like, okay, let's see what happens. And it was like, so, you know, it didn't know what to do. And I was like, so I disengaged and said, here's an edge case, guys, you know, because it's like, it should be able to pull through that because there was plenty of room. But I think because it doesn't have a bumper cam, it couldn't see in front of it, and it didn't know if it could drive through that. And of course, it can't reverse yet. So
and that's a big one. We hadn't talked about that yet. AI Driver made a very good detailed note on one of his videos about how it got in this cul-de-sac, and he noticed the trajectory coming back as if it had the ability of reversing. That would have been the path the nose of the car took, which is a very good sign that it's coming soon. Because if the planner is already saying, I need to be able to do this 3-point turn, reverse, and the front wheels will go there, that was a very insightful note he made there. Kudos to him for seeing that.
I would agree with that. I just so the left-hand turn I have is by it's in the parking lot of a Dollar General. Then I come out and it's a completely blocked, kind of blind left turn that you have to like go out across 5 lanes of traffic. And in the parking lot, so I'll do the autopilot to there navigation, and then I'll just like reset it to someplace else, and then it inevitably gets stuck in the parking lot. But the last couple times it's pulled up as if it was going to do a whip around backwards and then out. So it's like, oh, I can see it thinking the right way to do it. It just can't back up to get that third point of the 3-point turn. So
you know, this is another human machine interface thing we'll have to go through, and I think they've solved this, but it may be why we don't have it yet. Think about the scenarios of human intervention with the addition of additional vector of direction. So if you think you're going forward, but the car is in reverse, what direction does the car go if you hit the accelerator? Does it go faster in reverse if it happened to be in reverse? Or is the car actually, no, you're in drive, I'm putting you in reverse. If you hit the accelerator, I'm giving you drive, even though I'm giving you R. I mean, think about that scenario of, I more than likely they thought that through and solved it, but it does introduce some, you know, could we screw this up?
Reverse is so weird because obviously they can do it, because if you go to park your car, it reverses. So it's quite clearly capable of reversing. I'm very curious as to why they haven't implemented it yet. Maybe it's a safety thing, because like you said, what if you freak out? Like, let's say you are not paying attention, right? So you're like, okay. And it goes into the parking lot and it kind of noses in. And so it's right up against a wall or a curb, and it puts it in reverse and it starts to move, and the person freaks out and hits the accelerator. Or, you know, does it go backwards really fast and potentially hit a person? Does it go forwards and hit something? Does it ignore you and just say, nope?
Well, in the parking scenario, to your point, we don't have any control there. We've given it away in park. We have to just sit there and watch, right? You know, the accelerator, I don't think I've tried it, but I don't think it does anything. It may even say, whoa, I'm in. It's a different stack that's taken away.
I think you can disengage it by hitting stop, but that's about it. So
but the accelerator doesn't go forward or reverse when you press it when it's in that mode. It's taken control away from you. So now you're in. Is that how they're going to handle it? Are they going to, when it's in reverse, you're no longer in control? But now when we go forward again, you can have intervention again. I don't know.
Oh, that actually brings up a good question that I've been wanting to ask a lot of people. So currently, I believe that accelerators in all models of the Tesla, so let's not include the Cybertruck right now because different beast, but the accelerators accelerate by wire, so that it can completely ignore you if it wants to. The brake, I believe, is mechanical still in all the cars. And of course, the steering wheel it's got a mechanical linkage. So this means that, let's say that you want to rent out your car as a cybercab once that's available. What the hell? Do they just not allow people in the driver's seat? Or you have to be in the back? Because if I am one of those guys, I can reach over and just start, tweaking the steering wheel, and I can take over. I can override that thing because it's mechanical.
Yeah. Back to that Waymo analogy before, there's a lot of do not touch the steering wheel kind of warnings on the steering wheel. Do not touch, do not get in the driver's seat. So they've handled a fully functioning car with warnings, because I guess a driver could come and drive it away in a scenario there. These are good questions about, the hardware 2, hardware 3, hardware 4 kind of vehicles. Are they robo-taxi capable and equipped? They're going to be great autonomous cars with us in the seat. I'm confident of that now, but I'm still stuck on driver in the seat for a while, and I'll keep reevaluating my assessment, but I don't see the path off of this for where we are right now. It's feeling really good. I'm like, there's so much regulatory responsibility to truly give that away. Whether it be insurance, liability, all the other things of just we got to get down to that last fifth nine or whatever it is, probably, to truly let it go.
And again, if it's going to be a for hire type of situation. So again, like let's say it's your car, you're driving somewhere, and we're at a level where it says you don't have to be in the driver's seat. Cool. If it ever gets completely stuck, you can always get out, get in, hopefully not on a highway, but in a parking lot or something. You get out, you go into the driver's seat, and you drive off, and you can fix that problem. It's a very, very different ball game if it's not your car. If it's like a Waymo or a Cruise, it's like you're not allowed to touch it at that point. So in that case, we also need the backup of somebody, those people you were talking about, that can joystick drive it remotely. Well, are the cars equipped to be able to handle that with a 4G connection? Is that?
I think the answer to that is probably yes. And oh, by the way, Starlink can solve that if they wanted to start going that path and definitely solve it. I mean, the fact that we can see through our cameras from our phones, to me, means that a remote driver could probably, kind of assess the situation today. If all you needed was a little bit of a reverse and a little bit of an angle, it's probably solvable with remote assistance. Obviously, this is huge speculation about the way they would want to solve it. I know generally they don't like to settle for any solutions like that until they're actually forced to think that that's all they can do. Right now, Elon's got his team shooting for the moon and not going to let go of that until he sees he has to downgrade otherwise.
Yeah. Well, but I could see that being a way of getting regulatory approval. I'm sure that Waymo, one of the ways they got regulatory approval is, we got a guy who's back here who can drive the car if we get into a bad situation. So it may just be for the fact of regulatory approval. They may have to do that. So
absolutely. And don't forget, modifying the ODD, the operational design domain, is probably going to be a requirement on getting initial operating approval and certificates, which is commonplace. They're solving a generalized solution, but make no mistake, this will be a localized implementation at first.
And more than likely a San Francisco or Phoenix or something like that that's already very friendly towards these. If Phoenix is the obvious answer, because it's just a square grid.
It's very well marked roads, general square grids, traffic signals in most situations.
And the weather is generally very sunny. I mean, your tires don't melt, but aside from
very large bike lanes and extra space for pedestrians and stuff like that. I agree.
San Francisco was always one of those ones I was like, gosh, I know it's close to the Bay Area and that's where everybody, but I'm like, that's like, pick a harder city, guys.
I know. Which is even more impressive. That one Waymo drive I took with Omar, Omar's catalog. It was so comfortable taking thresholds that the Tesla would never have taken. But of course, it had very precise measurements and instruments, lidars and radars and things like that measuring. But it squeezed between a trolley car and a bus in a situation the Tesla would have just sat there and waited, because it's just like, I don't have the buffer I need. But that Waymo just
So tell me about that. Did you find that uncomfortable as a passenger, or were you just like, wow, that's cool?
Well, I was in the mindset of a Tesla driver going, "Oh, there's no way. Oh, there's no way.
Yeah.
It's just gonna stop." And then it kept on going, and I was like, "Oh my God, here it goes!" It totally, I was mind blown because in my
Yeah.
own paradigm, where we were with FSD 10 or wherever at the time, it wouldn't have done that. But then I also had to realize, oh my God, we got so much more instrumentation on this at the expense of instrumentation. Make no mistake, a much more expensive solution. But I guess it's able to thread the needle in some of those situations, and that's part of its game. But the way it handled some of the things that Tesla does well today didn't back then necessarily, with the out in the middle of the intersection, pedestrians crossing, you waiting on the last pedestrian, and then pre-rolling to get behind that person. Tesla is doing that today, much like the Waymo was doing too. So I think the software that Tesla's got with this end-to-end neural network is definitely the path. We're just on the learning phase of data curation, data sets, quantity of data, how to fix things with data. Right. Like take the question mark maneuver on my unprotected left-hand turn. The Cybertruck, if it's going to fit in that median, will need to go right and then left to go in at an angle. How do you train with data unless you go make it yourself? Right. Or I don't know. It's a tough problem to fix things with data.
Speaking of, you have not seen the Cybertruck at your left, have you?
No, other than mine, no.
No, but I'm like, I would imagine that at some point you're going to see a Cybertruck or a fleet of Cybertrucks making left-hand turns soon.
And I may have not talked to you about this, how I monitor. I've got a 18x zoom camera focused at the road where the cars have to drive by in order to get to my turn. Now, granted, they could be testing other turns too. And I've got a Python script using the YOLO V8 inference model running on an RTSP stream through that camera. So I've got a Python program that's snapshotting every single car or truck that drives through that frame. So I have this repository of images, and every day I scroll through every single car that drives through that intersection. And that's how I get those images I post on X. And if you notice, there's little bounding boxes that say car or truck. That's just the YOLO V8 inference model that's doing that. I did try to train my own model to only look for Teslas, and I ran into the data set problem where I couldn't get enough images to where it was reliable. So it was just easier to use the out-of-the-box model that was pre-trained.
Although they tend to drive black cars, so you could probably at least train it on black. It's like, so anyway, that's interesting. Tesla's going to be like, damn it.
Omar said it well one time. He's like, look at that, AI tracking AI. And I was like, I guess that's what it's doing.
Got it. That's very cool, though. I thought you just relied on your neighbors to tell you that they were doing it, but
I do have my, the ladies walk in the neighborhood. They all got cameras in their pockets, and many of them I've told them to take pictures of the cars in the neighborhood, because I initially had to manage it because there was this next door thread going on. Who are driving all these Teslas? There's all these young kids driving these Teslas around our neighborhood, and I had to kind of go on there and explain it. And then they put an article in the New York Times back in September a year or so ago, and I linked to that, and I said this is the story behind it, and they all kind of thought it was kind of cool that it was being done here.
I mean, you're famous, or famous adjacent at least. So here's an experience that I've had in the last month, just because. So I don't know if you know, but we because I was on summer break and working on a grant, and my wife works remotely, we went out to California to be near my brother for a month, which was great. And we were in LA. And because I was stupid and didn't rent a car in time, it was just very expensive to rent a Totoro, a Tesla. So we rented a Mazda CX-5, great car. But oh my gosh, I was like, I can't drive anymore. It took me several days before I felt like I was a good enough driver again, not to have driver assist stuff. I was like, I felt like my driving level. So I don't know if you have driven a non-Tesla or without autopilot.
Well, I have a similar story for the last Tesla event we went to. I'm already blanking on what it was, but it was in Austin a few weeks ago. It was
shareholder.
Yeah, it was a shareholders meeting, right? Well, I got stuck in Dallas, and I couldn't get a jump seat down to Austin because the American flights were full. So I had to panic and go rent a car. The only car I could find within like a 30 or 40 mile radius was the EVs nobody wanted to rent. So I rented a non-Tesla EV from this guy. He's like, it's like $400. I'm like, I'm not paying $400 for that. He's like, it's the last one in the lot. And he knew it was the last one.
And so
I ended up looking everywhere for another car, gas or not. Couldn't find one, so I'm like, fine, I'm gonna take it. And I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like a Kia or a Hyundai, something like that. Never driven it before.
Which are considered to be good cars, by the way.
But he gave it to me at 30%. And I was like,
Right.
oh, okay. And then as I drive out of there, I go into the, wait a minute. I'm looking at the map and
Yes,
I'm like, oh
where's
my
the
God,
charger?
I got to get the PlugShare app out. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I hadn't used this in a while. And then I found a spot to charge. But then you're going this long, lonely road down to Austin. And then I pulled off at a place that looked like on my PlugShare app had charging, but it was like a level 2, 9
Oh.
kilowatt something or another. And I had lunch and got like 4 miles at it. I'm like, oh no, this is the problem.
Right.
And I ended up finding an EVgo charger, which I think are getting better. Maybe Electrify America or something like that. And I did find a fast charging one in a Walmart parking lot, ended up saving the day. But I jumped into what every other EV driver has is range anxiety. And I'm like, it is a real thing if you're not driving a Tesla.
Right.
It was not comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. My brother and sister-in-law have a Chevy Bolt, and we took that up to Santa Barbara. And actually, the story of this is that this is actually the reason why I ended up buying a Tesla, was because I had been it was like I think it's a 2018, and that was just after the Model 3 came out and was ramping and stuff. And I drove their Bolt and I was like, ooh, electric cars are really cool. They've got a lot of pep, they're real fast and everything, zipping around town. But driving is actually like about 140, 150 miles, but you have to charge. And we searched around 3 or 4 different charging locations, broken, didn't work, couldn't get the app, like 9 watts, it's just like nothing. Fine. It took us forever. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sucks. And it's not like the Chevy Bolt has an app where it's like, go here, this will be the thing. So it really makes you appreciate Tesla and their supercharger network, because it's just not even a problem. You don't even think about it, because this is the exact same kind of thing as the driving. Is you put in your destination and it tells you when you're going to stop and how long you're going to stop. And that's great. So
it really is a underappreciated part, unless you've done both. And I acknowledge that the coming over to NACS and getting Ford and all these other vehicles on the network, they figured it out and they just capitulated and said, we just got to do this, and it was the right decision. But now we've got to convince all those folks that it can work. Because range anxiety is real, and I understand that. If your fear is that you won't have a place to charge,
Right. Yeah, it's a big thing. So, wow. All right. So other, I guess let's wrap up by just talking about, I had mentioned this and then we kind of broke away from it, but I feel like this is a fairly unique opportunity. I guess maybe something like having an iPhone and getting beta software on your iPhone, but that's a very different level of stuff. That's just convenience things and things. Like if you think about this, the kind of equivalent is that you really are getting to be a test pilot with like new software. It's a privilege to be able to be part of this. And no other company, I can't imagine another company except Tesla that would ever let this happen.
I don't think any other company has a CEO that would accept that much risk. And honestly, that's why Elon has been as successful of an entrepreneur as he is and if you ever study entrepreneurs, it's usually the ones that just go all in, and they're like, we're either going to make this or we're going to go bankrupt. And how many times has Elon said that about his companies? SpaceX, he's probably said it 2 or 3 times. Tesla in 2018, sleeping on the floor. We're either going to do this or we're going to go under.
2008 or whatever, when they almost ran out of money building the Roadster. So,
and if you listen to him on his earnings calls now, he's saying the exact same thing. He's even saying, if you don't believe in autonomy, get out of my stock. I mean, straight to the shareholders. If you don't believe we can do this, I don't want your money. Which is, it's amazing. He's being that clear. And I think that's the same sort of, I believe in this. I believe in the team can get us there. And I do too. But he's also willing to take that risk, and he can see it. I don't want to say like a hacker. Hacker is the wrong word. But if you think of the way, you might be able to appreciate this in academia. I appreciate it in industry. I watch my IT departments at the company I work for, and I'm like, how do we even get anything done? You've wrapped yourself in the bureaucracy of testing cycles and QA, and you're paying people to test things, and they don't even know what they're testing. They're just following a script. I'm like, okay, you've wrapped all of that in there, and Elon is going the complete different angle. He's writing it a little bit more like George Hotz would, and just said, nope, test it, write it, test it, break it. Just like he's iterating with Starship down on Starbase. And, obviously they're doing a lot of testing before we get to see it, but the philosophy is just eliminating so much red tape in the software development process. by, write it, test it, write it again.
Right.
So it is a privilege, but comes with a responsibility. And,
Yes.
and while we paid for this stuff, and you may think you earned it by paying for it, let me tell you, we're still kind of crossing that gray area. You may have paid for it, but you really probably shouldn't even have it in some of these scenarios, but we get to have it. So we should feel lucky that we do. And with that comes a responsibility of, you shouldn't become one of those numbers, but that perhaps gets in the press, and gets abused because, you weren't paying attention like you said you were going to when you click that little screen. Now, granted, that little screen is no different than every other EULA you've signed on every iOS or Android app you've ever done, but it is still probably there for a reason legally.
Yeah. And I have to say that the EULA, in at least the part that you signed for the beta thing, is at least it's just a paragraph. And it's not like one of those 40-page documents where they're hiding crap. It's like it's plain English. It's just like, hey, you're responsible, pay attention. The car's going to do stupid stuff when you least expect it, and so that be aware. I do feel incredibly privileged to be part of it. And yeah, it gets frustrating. Sometimes you're like, well, I paid, $7,000 or $8,000 or $10,000 for the software or something, and yada, yada. And I understand why people get like that, but I'm also like, well, then don't get it. If you don't want to be that person, don't get it. You have that option of not subscribing or not purchasing that software, and just wait until it's like, completely ready. But I am definitely happy that I have this opportunity. I'm like, when else will I ever in my life have the opportunity to be in this position and to actually help a company? Like, you think about it, you're like making the future a better place. This is something that's going to make the future better and safer. And already is.
I mean, even if it's through just data collection, so even if you never turn on your autopilot and you let it drive, hey, you're still contributing because they're watching, they're collecting that data about how you drive. And I think that's an amazing use of energy, technology, and data collection, to even think that there could be an AI web service, outsourced, if the Tesla energy paradigm of you can use my power wall to share energy, if there's a day that I can, cost share my AI chips that are sitting in the driveway, oh my God, who would have thunk?
That's pretty cool, right?
And
and it even has lessons for other things, because my little company, we got a contract this summer and made it a much busier summer, but I have been pulling on some of the threads that Tesla does. I'm like, ooh, this data flywheel that Tesla uses, that's really interesting. And so can we emulate that in our own small fashion? So those are really interesting possibilities. Yeah, it's really cool
to learn from that.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I have kept you. I know you have a hard deadline to get out of there. So thank you so much again, Chuck, for being on. And I'm going to get back down to Jacksonville sometime soon, and because I want to go surfing too. So,
so
do a little surfing. You can drive me to the surfing spot, like in full self-driving, and we'll have a chat. And we'll talk about your bees, because
coming out, taking the apiary. And you and Lane are always welcome. Come on down anytime. Don't need an invitation. Just let me know, and I'll try to be available. But if not, it will be another TestaCon of some sort, or another Austin event, or somewhere soon.
Yep, that'll be the case. All right, everybody, go follow Chuck. Make sure you follow him on X and on YouTube and everything, and watch his amazing drives, and consider yourself lucky to be a test pilot. There you go.
All right,
that's what you get to think of yourself as. Cool.
Thanks, John.
Bye, everybody.